Hey everybody, I'd like to welcome you guys back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host LB. So today's video, I'm going to be doing a discography review on Jesse Johnson. So for those of you who may not know who Jesse Johnson is, he's a singer, songwriter, musician, record producer, originally from Rock Island, Illinois, but he actually started his career in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He is an artist that came from under the Prince umbrella. He's best known for being the lead guitarist in the band The Time. You know, after that band's first breakup in '85, he went on to have a pretty successful solo career. And he also did something very similar to Prince, where under his label, he was able to start writing and recording and producing for other artists as well. So he had his own little umbrella of artists that he was writing for and putting records out on, as well as producing. And he also produced for people like Janet Jackson. You know, he produced some songs for her in her early career. A group called Tamara in the Scene. He did a countless soundtracks. I know he had a hit song that was on the Breakfast Club soundtrack. He's done a lot of really cool things throughout his career, man. But I wanted to talk about and discuss briefly his solo albums, because I think that Jesse Johnson as a solo artist, he doesn't really get the wide recognition that I think he deserves. For one thing, he's one of the greatest guitar players of all time, which is, people who are in the know recognize that talent. And I think that more people should just really recognize who, like, the talent that he possesses, man. Because honestly, he's one of my favorites to come from under the Prince umbrella. I would say he's probably my number one favorite Prince protege. I really dig his style. You know, I've actually managed to obtain most of his solo albums. Actually, all of his solo albums that he's put out, I've managed to obtain them. It wasn't easy, but I did do it. And I just wanted to briefly talk about those records right now. So without further ado, we're going to get into this video. And of course, we're going to start with the first of Jesse Johnson's solo albums, which is Jesse Johnson's Review, released in 1985 on A&M Records. I also own this album on vinyl. I actually had the vinyl longer than I did the CD. The CD version is actually it's not hard to find, but it's pretty expensive. Fortunately, recently I was able to find one, the cheapest one that I could find that was in good condition. I was able to find that recently on eBay. So I'm really excited to have this in my collection finally on CD. So this was actually my introduction into Jesse Johnson's solo career, because my parents actually used to own the 12-inch single of the hit song Be Your Man, which had the song Special Love that also appears on this album on the B side, man. But so I was introduced to this as a kid, and I really like this album. But one thing that I don't really like about it is that there's just not enough guitar on here. This record is mainly dominated by a lot of synth, a lot of bass synths, a lot of electronics, a lot of drum machines, and so forth. The guitar only shows up on a few songs, and most of the time it shows up like either towards the end where the song's fading out, or maybe there's like a little brief quick solo that pops up in the song. But for the most part, this album is very much dominated by synths. So it kind of keeps that same formula, that mid 80s Minneapolis sound that Jesse was a part of, pioneering along with The Time, as well as Prince and the Revolution and so many other artists that were popping up out of that scene that were influenced by that formula. So that's pretty much where this record stands sound wise, but it's still a good record. You know, that's not to say that this album is terrible. It's by far not a terrible album. There's a lot of good groove on here, a lot of really good dance numbers on here as well. I just wish there had been a lot more guitar on here. As a matter of fact, there's a B-side to one of the singles called Free World that showcased Jesse Johnson's rock edge, which I wish that song would have been included on the record. But I don't know. I'm guessing maybe that's what the record label wanted him to do at the time. They wanted him to kind of keep that more Prince mid 80s Minneapolis formula going. But nonetheless, man, I think it's a solid debut. Really cool cover art, might I add. But a lot of great songs on here, man. But a solid debut from Jesse Johnson right here. All right, so next, and this one is one of my favorite Jesse Johnson albums right here. His second album, called Shockadelica, released in 1986. And let me take this cover out the case. I actually found this at a record store like several years ago. But yeah, here's the actual cover art, and this is a European version of this album because none of the American CD versions have Jesse's name or the title on the cover. It's usually just a picture of Jesse. But this album, in my personal opinion, you know what? This album was an improvement over the first one. And the reason why I say that is because Shockadelica had more of an organic sound compared to the more synth heavy, more electronic based of Jesse Johnson's review. And it's kind of interesting that this album is only credited to Jesse Johnson, and the first one is credited to him and his backing band, when this record actually sounds more like a band is involved because there's just more like live instrumentation on here. It just has more of an organic sound compared to the first record. You know, he has background vocalists that are pretty prominent throughout the album. It just has an all around better vibe that just feels more like there was more band contribution and band involvement in the songs. One thing that I do enjoy about this record is that while it still does kind of maintain that mid 80s Minneapolis sound, this time you hear Jesse coming into his own. You're really starting to hear what he brings to the table. He's taking that sound, he's taking that influence, and he's pretty much making his own variation of it. So this is Jesse Johnson's take on that particular sound. And every song on this record is just great. Of course, this album is best known for the huge single called Crazy, which features Sly Stone. And what's funny about that is that Jesse didn't even like that song. That song was actually on his list of songs that he didn't like when he recorded this record. And John McClain, the gentleman that signed him to A&M Records, heard him. He heard him play the song. He liked it. And he took it to LA and said, "Yo, I'm gonna get Sly Stone on it." And that's how that worked out. What's another great song? Baby Let's Kiss. Now, the album version is pretty cool, but I much rather prefer the extended 12-inch version because it has more of a rock edge to it, has a different rhythm. To me, that version is all around better. The album version is cool. It's more of like a funky kind of, has like a bit of a Latin freestyle kind of influence. Let's see here. Do Yourself a Favor, which I believe is an unreleased Prince song that was written by Pepe Willie. Prince fans already know the significance of Pepe Willie in Prince's early career, but this is an unreleased Prince song, and I don't know if Do Yourself a Favor has ever been released or if there's any fans out there that may have bootleg versions of it. I don't know, but it was a pretty cool. It was a pretty cool take. It was a pretty cool cover of that track. Black in America, which ends the album, a very acoustic number, which almost a cappella but more acoustic with Jesse and his two background vocalists, and him. It's basically a song of social commentary and so forth. Something that Jesse will start to really do a lot with this record and preceding albums, man. Succeeding albums. But I just really enjoyed this record, man. It was a huge success. I believe the record sold over 1 million copies. So it is a platinum album. Unfortunately, it's not in print no more. So copies that you do find do run kind of expensive because it's hard to find. It's no longer in print anymore, which is a shame since it's one of Jesse's best-selling records. But this is a great record. And most people also probably already know the history behind the title, Shockadelica. You know, Prince, he heard about the title. He asked Jesse why he didn't have a title track to the song. Jesse wasn't interested in doing a title track. So Prince decided to record a song called Shockadelica, and he rushed it out to make it look like Jesse stole that title from him, which was shady on Prince's part. So most people already know the history behind that. And Shockadelica was a term that Jesse had been using for years to describe like a fine female or just something that was just really cool. But all around, man, this is one of Jesse Johnson's best records. I think it's a favorite amongst his fans. It's one of my favorites, man. I just really like that more rock edge and that more organic feel that this record possesses, man. So if you do come across this one, be sure to pick it up. Don't overlook it, man. This is a great record. To me, a big improvement over the debut, and one of my favorites in his albums, in his discography. All right, so this next album, I don't know. I might be contradicting myself a little bit here, but the next album is Every Shade of Love, released in 1988, and I really like this album a lot. Now, I will say that with this record, it doesn't really have that It doesn't really have that organic feel like Shockadelica did. Like you can definitely tell that there's a lot more drum machines being used on here. So he sort of kind of reverted back to what he did with the first record as far as bringing more of that synth funk and that more electronic sound back. But I think what I like so much about this record is that he just brought in so much more guitar work on here. If you listen to most of these songs, Jesse he brings in some amazing guitar solos on a good bit of these tracks. And they're not like little short sweet guitar solos like he did on the first record. I mean, he gives you that right balance. He gives you just enough just to satisfy just to satisfy that for the fans who are a fan of his guitar work. And you can tell that with each album he's slowly kind of going more towards that rock edge, because this is essentially a funk rock album, which is why I like it so much. And the songs on here are just very catchy. They're very up tempo, very danceable. There's only one slow song on here called I'm Just Wanting You, but it really doesn't break up the momentum of the record. I mean, that particular song, and I'm usually kind of a stickler about songs having these upbeat kind of danceable grooves and then it goes to a slow track, but that song, it really doesn't hurt the album. It's there for a reason. It fits perfectly with the rest of the songs. And I don't know, I just really like this album, man. This album is just so funky. It's just so fun to listen to, man. Like you could really burn a hole in the dance floor listening to this record. But I just really dug how Jesse just employed so much more guitar work on this record. That's what really took this album to the next level, as well as his background vocalist Kim Cage. She's prominent throughout the whole entire album, and you know the chemistry and dynamic between her and Jesse, man, is just really good. You know, she was a really great addition to this record. You know, her providing pre-choruses and stuff like that, and her and Jesse singing in unison, it just worked so perfectly together. But Every Shade of Love, man, this is a pretty underrated album, because I didn't even know much about this album until I was following or friends with Jesse on MySpace, and the album was included on his MySpace page. I've never heard much about this record, so it's pretty underrated, but I definitely think that it's one of his best records. And you know, more people should know about this album because it's a solid record from start to finish, man. Actually, I can't think of any weak moments on this record. That's just how good it is, man. So this is another one. If you've never heard Every Shade of Love, it is available on Spotify, on other streaming services. So check it out, man, because very funky album, very fun to listen to. Definitely one of Jesse's best. All right, so this next album. Now, if anybody was to ask me what I would consider to be the best Jesse Johnson album, I'm gonna automatically tell you this one. Bare My Naked Soul, released in 1996, man. I really like this album, man, and it took me so long to find a copy for a reasonable price and have it in my collection, man. Really like this album. This to me, you know, as much as I like Shockadelica and Every Shade of Love, this is my number one favorite Jesse Johnson album. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because this is a full-fledged hard rock album. That's what this is. This is like longtime fans of Jesse Johnson, because I'm a lot younger than most longtime fans of Jesse Johnson. You know, I'm probably 30 years behind most of longtime fans, but just in general, man, this is the album that so many fans have been waiting for, because most fans knew how great of a guitar player Jesse Johnson is, and what he's capable of on the guitar. And with each album, he was steadily showing you just how great he was on the guitar. And this is the one where he just finally just let it all out and did what he wanted to do. And you know, maybe, you know, those other albums were released on major labels, so maybe the labels weren't allowing him to really make that full-fledged rock album like he wanted to, or maybe he just didn't feel that maybe that was the right time to do that. But this one, this one is just so good, man. And it was a huge gap between this album and the last one, Every Shade of Love. Every Shade of Love came out in '88, and this one came out in '96, so close to 10 years. But you know, in between that time, Jesse did keep busy producing and writing for other artists, you know, maintaining his own umbrella of artists, as well as the reunion of the time, the original lineup, where they did the Pandemonium album, as well as the Prince movie Graffiti Bridge. But this album came out on a small label called, excuse me, this album came out on a small label called Dinosaur Records, and I'm guessing that label's probably defunct now. It probably didn't even last long, which is why this record is probably so highly sought after. But most copies of this album are up in like the hundreds and $200. So I forget how much my copy was when I found it. I actually bought this during the pandemic, and so I took a chance. This was like at the height of the pandemic, so I took a chance, because that's when people thought that you could catch it through the mail and stuff. But I bought it, I seen it, had the bread for it, and I got it. And I was really glad to finally own it in my collection. I can't remember, but I know it wasn't in the hundreds. Might have been kind of midway there, but for whatever I paid for it, man, it came in really good condition. And I was just excited to hear this record because I knew nothing about this album again until I followed Jesse on MySpace. Because whoever had his MySpace layout, they did a good job at displaying all his credentials and his albums and so forth. So that was my introduction into Bare My Naked Soul. But at the time, that was like '07, '08. There wasn't a lot of the music from this album being posted on YouTube. So it was a few years later before I started finding songs from this album. And that's where I really got to hear what this record brought. And it brings nothing but balls to wall hard rock with blues influences. There's also some mellow moments, some ballads with a more acoustic approach. But I gotta tell you, the guitar is the star on this record. I mean, Jesse displays so many blistering solos. I mean, so many heavy riffs, a lot of groove to it, a lot of slide guitar, and on a few songs like this. Most people consider this to be his best album, and I honestly couldn't agree more. I mean, this is his best album. I just really dig this record from start to finish, man. It's just a great record, and I wish that it was more accessible for people to really get out there and hear. Unfortunately, it's not on streaming services, and there haven't been any reissues of this album just yet. I think a lot of that is intentional on Jesse's part. I don't know. Maybe he's got something cooking in the works, something special, maybe a special edition for it. I don't know, but I hope one day that he could maybe put this record back out so more people could have access to this, man. Because I think more people need to hear this record because it's a great record. It's a great rock album that I think more people should hear, and I think a lot of people would enjoy. So yeah, if you get a chance, go on YouTube and check out a few songs from this album, Bare My Naked Soul. One song in particular. Here's a few songs I'll let you guys should check out. The title track, Bare My Naked Soul, My Life, Let Me In, Walk Like Me, Talk Like Me, Shock to the System, War Babies. That's just a few of the songs, man. But I recommend all of them, honestly. But those are some starters I'm gonna give to you guys. But yeah, Jesse Johnson, Bare My Naked Soul, just my monster of a rock album right here. All right, so lastly is the most recent Jesse Johnson album, and this one actually came out back in 2009, I believe. And I actually remember when Jesse was promoting this record. I don't know why I didn't check it out back then or consider buying it back then. But his most recent solo album, which is Verbal Penetration, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I'm guessing this is like two albums packaged together. Or you could easily just say it's a double set album. It's got a really cool picture of Jesse Johnson right here. Now, I've heard a lot of people, I've heard a lot of fans of Jesse Johnson call this his best album, one of his best albums. You know what? It is a good record. It is a good record. But I'm gonna tell you, I much prefer the first disc, Volume 1, over Volume 2. So here's why. Volume 1, I really enjoy. I really enjoy the first disc because from the start, man, you can tell Jesse, he's going back to his roots, his funk and soul roots. So you get like this psychedelic soul sound on that first disc, man. So you kind of hear the influences of like James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Curtis Mayfield, some Hendrix, and so forth. You hear those influences. It's just such a good mesh of those influences together. And there's even some parts in the album where it ventures off into a more like R&B neo soul kind of vibe, which I really dug as well. So that first disc really did it for me. But once it got to the second disc, that's where I started to get a bit disappointed. Because the second disc, while it has some good music on there, and it has a few good songs, what really brought it down for me was the fact that a lot of those songs, they were just spoken monologues. One song, if you want to call it a song in particular, it was, I swear it was like some kind of album review of this album. It was like an extensive album review of Verbal Penetration. It had this weird, like, kind of tribal, almost kind of dystopian, spiritual kind of vibe to it, and it was discussing something about someone called the Naiji or whatever. It was like taking this whole album into like this spiritual kind of sci-fi realm that kind of was going over my head a little bit. And then there's a guy that keeps popping up doing these speaking monologues about the plight of society, speaking on the condition of black people and so forth. I mean, I understand. I guess the message is, I understand the message is meant to be positive and so forth, but I just wish a lot of that would have been conveyed from Jesse in a song, him singing those parts instead of it being like spoken word or whatever. Because what really done it for me was that all these parts they have good music behind them. They have really great music behind them, and it almost sounds like a waste of a good song to just have some guy in the studio just talking over it. I would have much rather heard those same messages and issues being sung by Jesse. It's not like he can't do it. He's done it in songs like Black America and A Better Way and Every Shade of Love. He's done it. But that's what really brought this album down for me. I feel as though that maybe he could have took like the best songs from disc 2 and added them on disc 1. He could have just took the best songs from both discs and made one single album that would have been just a lot more better. That's just my personal opinion. Like I said, I liked it the first disc. Like it had a few parts on there that had those spoken word things, but maybe like I think it was like maybe one or two parts. This one, the second disc, is kind of spliced in between like every other song. But I just wasn't feeling that. I just wasn't feeling that, man. It started to come off more like filler, and it kind of makes you question: did this really need to be a double set album? Couldn't it have just been trimmed down to just a one single disc? But in any case, man, musically, this is a great record. I would say from a musical standpoint, this is one of Jesse's best albums. But it just brought it down for me with those spoken monologues and those reprises that dominate disc 2. Disc 1 is excellent. I enjoy that. But disc 2, yeah, kind of brought me down a little bit. And you know something? Disc 2, you know what disc 2 kind of reminded me of a little bit? And Jesse would agree. He would disagree. It kind of reminded me of the Rainbow Children by Prince. You know, if anybody that's heard that album from Prince, the Rainbow Children, you know there were songs at the end. It had like these like little brief spoken monologues where it's Prince talking in this low distorted voice. A lot of that kind of reminded me of that in some ways. So I don't know if that was an influence going into this or what, but that's what it kind of reminded me of when I heard those parts. Especially the one song on that disc 2 where it's like this spiritual, like scientific album review of Verbal Penetration. That reminded me a lot of the kind of vibe and sound of the Rainbow Children by Prince. But in any case, you know, it's not a terrible record. I just wish that, you know, it could have been trimmed down. The fat could have been trimmed back, and that we could have just got maybe a single disc of some really great funk, psychedelic soul sounds, honestly. But it's not a bad record. But if you're somebody that wants to be a completist in Jesse Johnson's catalog, definitely buy it. It's not very accessible. Most of Jesse Johnson's solo albums aren't very accessible, so you might have to pay a little bit if you find a copy. But it is what it is, man. It's musically it's good, but you know, it is what it is. And now that's Jesse Johnson's most recent solo album. He did do another album after that with singer Sue Ann Carwell. I can't think of the name of the album, but I think it was a collaboration between them two. It was a blues rock album. Sue Ann Carwell, she's a singer, musician, artist from Minneapolis. She was actually supposed to be one of Prince's first proteges. That was early in his career. That was like right after his second album, Prince. So around 79 or early 1980, around that era. She was actually supposed to be one of Prince's first proteges, but for whatever reason that didn't work out. And she's actually the one that discovered Jesse Johnson. She found him in a dive-in, hole-in-the-wall biker bar playing the blues, and she brought him to Prince, the way the story goes. So that album, I will try to check out. I hope it's on Spotify or something that I can listen to it and check that record out as well. But yeah, that's it for this discography review of Jesse Johnson. This is one of the more shorter ones because, Jesse, he doesn't have a vast discography of albums, man. But what he does have is pretty good. It's pretty great. I enjoy his music. Like I said, he's one of my favorites to come from under that Prince umbrella, that whole protege, that whole scene. I really enjoy his music, and I'm fortunate to have the music that I do have of his, because it's not easy to find. But in any case, if you guys enjoyed this discography review, if you enjoyed this discography review, if you could do me a huge favor, you could hit that thumbs up, give me a like, helps with the channel. Also, if you could hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, that way you'll be notified when I drop new content. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that's been taking their time to watch my channel and support my videos, my posts, and everything like that. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.